On my 68th birthday, my son-in-law smeared cake on my face and yelled at the top of his lungs, "The old fool doesn't deserve anything." All the guests laughed, and my daughter just stood there silently. I calmly wiped myself with a napkin, walked up to him, and whispered just 2 words. His face turned white as chalk. The chocolate frosting hit my face with enough force to snap my head back. For a moment, everything went silent. That peculiar silence that follows a car crash or a slap across the face. Then Brandon's voice cut through it like a knife. "You old fool. You don't deserve anything. You've held on to this house long enough." 30 guests stood frozen in my living room, champagne glasses suspended midair. My 68th birthday cake, German chocolate, my favorite, now dripped down my navy suit onto the Persian rug I'd bought with my first judge's salary. The same rug where my daughter Jennifer had taken her first steps 42 years ago. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, frosting smearing across my knuckles. Through the blur, I watched Henry Wilson, Brandon's business partner, double over with laughter. 3 of their real estate friends joined in, their cackling sharp and deliberate. My neighbor Margaret covered her mouth in shock. My former courthouse colleague Michael looked like he wanted to intervene, but couldn't quite process what he'd witnessed. Jennifer, my only daughter, stood near the fireplace. Our eyes met for 1 second. I waited for her to move, to speak, to do something. She looked at her shoes instead. "Did you see her face?" Henry gasped between laughs, pulling out his phone. "I got it on video." The rational part of my brain, the part that had presided over criminal trials for 3 decades, catalogued every detail. Brandon's flushed cheeks and rapid breathing suggested adrenaline, not alcohol. The slight tremor in his hands indicated nervousness despite his bold action. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. This was planned. I reached for a linen napkin from the dining table. My hands were steady as I methodically cleaned my face. 30 years on the federal bench teaches you to control your reactions. I'd heard defendants call me worse things than old fool. I'd watched murderers smirk at their victims' families. A son-in-law with frosting on his fingers was hardly the worst thing I'd faced. But the disrespect burned. Not the cake, not the words, the calculated cruelty of choosing this moment, this place, in front of everyone who'd known me for decades. I walked toward Brandon. He stood his ground, chin lifted, eyes defiant. Up close, I noticed the slight pulse jumping in his neck. Fear masked by aggression. I'd seen that combination 1,000 times in my courtroom. I leaned in close enough that only he could hear. 2 words, spoken softly. "Your mother." The color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. His pupils dilated. His mouth opened then closed. He took 1 stumbling step backward, reaching for the armchair to steady himself. Then his eyes rolled back and his knees buckled. I caught him before he hit the floor. Old reflexes from 40 years of martial arts practice. He was lighter than I expected. All sharp angles and expensive cologne. His head lolled against my shoulder, completely unconscious. "Brandon." Jennifer finally moved, rushing over with panic written across her face. "What did you do to him?" "Mom, what the hell did you say?" "I think someone should call 911, Margaret said, her voice shaking. "He'll be fine," I said, lowering Brandon gently onto my leather sofa. "Just fainted." "Jennifer, get some water." "You provoked him." Jennifer's face was red now, her finger jabbing toward me accusingly. "This is your fault. You always have to. You can't just." She couldn't even finish a sentence. My daughter, who used to debate politics with me over Sunday breakfast, who'd inherited my sharp mind, if not my backbone, reduced to sputtering fragments. "The party's over," I announced to the room. My voice carried the same authority it had when clearing my courtroom. "Thank you all for coming. I apologize for the disruption." People scattered like startled birds. Within minutes, only Jennifer remained, kneeling beside her unconscious husband, dabbing his forehead with a damp cloth. Henry had vanished the moment Brandon fell. Interesting. I stood in my doorway, watching neighbors hurry to their cars, watching Michael throw me a concerned look over his shoulder. The March evening air was cool against my frosting-covered shirt. My house, my sanctuary for 45 years, suddenly felt like a battlefield. Brandon's eyes fluttered open. He looked around disoriented, then his gaze locked onto mine. The fear in his expression told me everything I needed to know. He knew that I knew. After everyone left and Brandon recovered enough to walk, refusing any medical attention, I stood alone in my study. Chocolate frosting had dried on my collar. I caught my reflection in the glass-fronted bookcase. A 68-year-old woman in a ruined suit, looking every bit that old fool Brandon had called me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon, Woodford Reserve, the good stuff I saved for occasions, and sat at my desk. The desk where I'd written hundreds of legal opinions, where I'd prepared for countless trials. On the wall above it hung my diplomas. Law degree from Georgetown, certificates from my years of service, a photograph of my swearing-in ceremony. And there, in a silver frame on the corner of my desk, a photo from Jennifer's wedding 8 years ago. Brandon in a tuxedo, handsome and young. Jennifer beaming in white. I stood beside them in my best suit, proud mother of the bride, completely oblivious to the trap closing around me. I opened my laptop and pulled up a file I hadn't looked at in 15 years. Case number 2010, CR 4729. United States versus Victoria Foster. The memory came back sharp and clear. The courtroom had been packed that November day. Foster sat at the defendant's table in an expensive suit that couldn't hide her guilt. Her attorney, some hotshot from Miami, had argued for leniency. Your Honor, Ms. Foster has a family, a son in college. This was a mistake, not a pattern of behavior. I'd reviewed the evidence thoroughly. Victoria Foster had orchestrated a real estate investment scheme that defrauded 14 families of their retirement savings. $3,700,000 stolen through fabricated property values and falsified inspection reports. Elderly couples who trusted her with their life's work found themselves with worthless deeds and empty bank accounts. Ms. Foster, I'd said from the bench, you didn't just steal money. You stole futures, security, peace of mind. The law requires I consider your remorse and potential for rehabilitation, but the evidence shows calculated, prolonged deception. 12 years in federal prison. The gavel had fallen. Foster's face crumpled. And in the gallery, a young man, maybe 22, had burst into tears. Dark hair, thin frame, eyes filled with rage as he stared at me. Her son, I'd assumed. I'd felt sympathy for him then. Children shouldn't pay for their parents' crimes. I never connected that tearful young man with the polished real estate agent my daughter brought home 7 years later. Why would I? He'd introduced himself as Brandon Lee, his father's surname. I now realized. He'd been charming, attentive, full of admiration for our family history. He'd laughed at my courtroom stories, asked intelligent questions about constitutional law, treated me with what I'd believed was genuine respect. Mom, I really think Brandon's the one, Jennifer had said over coffee at the Harbor Room in January 2017. The restaurant's windows overlooked Charleston Harbor, boats bobbing in the morning light. I know it's fast, but when you know, right? I'd wanted to believe in love at first sight. I'd wanted my daughter to be happy. So I'd ignored the small inconsistencies. How Brandon never talked about his mother. How he'd changed the subject whenever family history came up. How he'd been oddly insistent about moving into my house instead of finding their own place. It's such a beautiful home, he'd said, smiling that perfect smile. And you have so much space. We could save for our own house while helping you out. Win-win. The bourbon burned going down. I'd been a federal judge. I'd spent 30 years evaluating evidence, detecting lies, seeing through manipulation. And I'd missed it completely because he was my daughter's choice, because I'd wanted to trust him. The warning signs had been there. How he'd measured the rooms with his eyes, commenting on property values and market conditions. How he'd befriended all our neighbors, asking questions about the neighborhood, about my finances, about my plans for retirement. How he'd gradually inserted himself into every aspect of my life, while simultaneously creating distance between Jennifer and me. "Your mom's so old-fashioned," I'd overheard him tell Jennifer last Christmas. "She doesn't understand modern relationships. Maybe you shouldn't tell her about our business plans. She'll just worry." I opened another file on my laptop. My personal records. The house at 1847, Battery Street had been appraised at $890,000 last year. Combined with my retirement savings and investments, $340,000, my estate totaled $1,230,000. Not a fortune by some standards, but enough to be worth scheming for. Enough to be worth 8 years of pretending. The realization settled over me like cold water. Brandon hadn't fainted from shock at my party. He'd fainted because he understood in that instant that his elaborate revenge plot had just collapsed. I knew who he really was. I knew why he'd married my daughter. And most importantly, he knew that I knew. 8 years of his life invested in this long game. 8 years of playing the devoted son-in-law. All while plotting to destroy me from the inside. The son of a convicted criminal, seeking justice, or was it vengeance, against the judge who'd sent his mother to prison. I couldn't entirely blame him for hating me. From his perspective, I'd broken his family. But Victoria Foster had broken herself. I'd simply held her accountable. The difference was I'd done it lawfully. Whatever Brandon was planning, and after tonight I was certain he was planning something, wouldn't be legal. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Victoria Bennett. We'd worked together for 20 years, back when she was a prosecutor and I was on the bench. Now she specialized in estate law. We'd had dinner just last month, discussing our mutual love of antique clocks and complaining about Charleston humidity. Tomorrow morning, I decided. I'd call Victoria tomorrow. Not to punish Brandon. Not yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what he was planning. Then I needed to protect what was mine. And then I'd show him what real justice looked like. I finished my bourbon, changed out of my ruined suit, and went to my workshop in the garage. On my bench sat a 1923 Waltham pocket watch I'd been restoring for 3 months. The mechanism was delicate, requiring patience and steady hands. One wrong move could destroy something valuable. I picked up my jeweler's loupe and got to work. Funny how fixing broken things always helped me think clearly. By the time I went to bed at midnight, I had a plan forming. Not revenge. I'd spent too many years on the bench to confuse justice with vengeance. But accountability. Consequences. Protection. Brandon thought he was playing a long game. He had no idea how patient I could be, or how thoroughly a federal judge learns to document everything. 5 days after Victoria and I met at the harbor room, I sat in my study, watching the security camera feed on my laptop. The cameras had been installed years ago after a break-in attempt in the neighborhood, but I'd never paid much attention to them. Now they felt like windows into a world I'd been living in but never truly seeing. On screen, Brandon paced the kitchen while talking on his phone. Jennifer sat at the dining table, head in her hands. Even without audio, the body language told a story. His aggressive gestures. Her defeated slouch. My daughter looked like a puppet with cut strings. I needed information. Real, actionable intelligence. Victoria had been clear about that during our meeting. "Gloria," she'd said, stirring her coffee with deliberate precision, "suspicion isn't enough. If Brandon's planning something, we need proof. Documentation. Evidence that would hold up in court." "I was a federal judge for 3 decades, I'd replied. "I know what constitutes evidence." "Then you also know that emotions cloud judgment. Hire someone objective. Someone who does this professionally." She'd slid a business card across the table. "Sarah King, Private Investigations." The card was simple, understated. Just a name, phone number, and a small magnifying glass icon. No flashy tagline, no promises. Professional. On March 18th, I called the number. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and businesslike. King Investigations. My name is Gloria Harris. I need someone to investigate my son-in-law. Family matter? Yes. I charge $150 per hour plus expenses. 3-hour minimum deposit upfront. That's $450. Investigation typically runs 2 to 3 weeks for basic surveillance and financial checks. Are you looking for infidelity, financial malfeasance, or something else? Her directness was refreshing. No false sympathy, no prying questions. Just facts. Financial malfeasance and potential conspiracy to commit fraud. There was a pause. That's more complex. I'd estimate $3,500 for a thorough investigation, including surveillance, financial records review, and documented evidence suitable for legal proceedings. When can you start? Tomorrow. We met the next morning at a coffee shop in downtown Charleston. Neutral territory. Sarah King was nothing like the investigators in movies. No trench coat, no cigarettes, no gruff demeanor. She was maybe 52, wearing a navy blazer and carrying a leather portfolio. She looked like someone's accountant, which I suppose was the point. Tell me what you know, she said, pulling out a legal pad. I explained everything. The birthday party incident. Victoria Foster. Brandon's hidden identity. The strange behavior I'd noticed over the past year. His increasing interest in my financial affairs. His subtle questions about my will. The way he'd positioned himself between Jennifer and me. What do you think he's planning? Sarah asked, pen poised. I think he wants to declare me incompetent. Take control of my estate through Jennifer. Has he made any concrete moves in that direction? Not yet. But I feel it coming. Call it 30 years of reading people. Sarah nodded. You mentioned you own the house they're living in. 1847, Battery Street. I bought it in 1980. They moved in after the wedding in 2017. That gives us options. As the property owner, you can legally install monitoring devices in common areas. Kitchen, living room, dining room. Not bedrooms or bathrooms, obviously. South Carolina is a two-party consent state for phone conversations, but there are exceptions for property owners protecting their interests. You're talking about bugs. I'm talking about audio monitoring in your own home, which is legal with proper documentation. She met my eyes. Ms. Harris, if your son-in-law is planning to defraud you, he'll discuss it. People always talk. They think they're safe in their own home. They get comfortable. How long would it take to install? I can have a technician there this afternoon while they're at work. Small devices, completely invisible. Voice-activated recording. Everything uploaded to a secure cloud server that only you and I can access. I thought about the ethics of it. 30 years on the bench had taught me the importance of due process, of respecting privacy. But this was my home. My property. And if Brandon was conspiring to rob me of my autonomy, my assets, my dignity, then I had every right to protect myself. Do it, I said. The next 3 weeks were educational. I'd thought I knew manipulation when I saw it. I'd presided over fraud cases, embezzlement trials, con artists of every variety. But watching it unfold in my own home, hearing it through those tiny microphones, was different. Brandon was good. Very good. On March 22nd, I listened to him on the phone with Henry Wilson. The old woman's losing it, I swear. Yesterday she couldn't remember where she put her reading glasses. They were on her head. Laughter. No, Jennifer doesn't see it yet. She's in denial. But I'm documenting everything. Dates, times, incidents. We'll need witness statements when we petition the court. The glasses had been on my desk. I'd known exactly where they were. But I'd played confused, just for a moment, testing a theory. He'd pounced on it like a cat on a wounded bird. On March 24th, another call. My lawyer says we need at least 6 witnesses. People who have observed the mental decline. Can you get your boyfriend and his sister to sign statements? I'll pay them $500 each. Call it a consultation fee for their time. Buying false testimony. My hands clenched listening to that recording. On March 29th, I heard him coaching Jennifer. Honey, your mom's not the woman she used to be. I know you don't want to see it, but someone has to take responsibility. What if she falls? What if she has an accident? We'd never forgive ourselves. This isn't about the house. It's about keeping her safe. The concern in his voice was masterful. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed it myself. April 3rd brought the real revelation. Brandon and Henry in my living room, discussing their real estate agency. We're bleeding money, Brandon. The loan payment is $4,000. We're behind on office rent. $8,100 in arrears. And we've only closed 2 properties this quarter. I know. Just hold on until July. Once Jennifer has power of attorney, we sell this place. Split the proceeds. The house is worth $890,000. Even after paying off our debts, we'll clear enough to restart the business properly. What about Gloria? What about her? She'll be in a nice assisted living facility. Jennifer signs the papers. The old woman doesn't get a vote. I sat in my study, headphones on, listening to them plan my life like I was already gone. The cold calculation of it. The casual dismissal of my existence. But here's what they didn't understand. Every word they spoke was being recorded, time-stamped, documented. Admissible as evidence under South Carolina law because they were discussing conspiracy to commit fraud in my home, which I had every legal right to monitor. Sarah King delivered the full report on April 8th. 47 pages of transcripts. Financial records showing the $89,000 in business debt. Bank statements revealing the monthly bleeding of $4,200 in loan payments. Copies of text messages between Brandon and various witnesses promising payment for statements. This is ironclad, Sarah said, tapping the report. Everything here is legally obtained and admissible. If he tries to file for guardianship or incompetency, you can bury him with this. I paid her the remaining balance. $3,500 felt like the bargain of the century. And she left me with the evidence of my son-in-law's betrayal, neatly organized in a leather binder. That evening, I made myself a bourbon and sat on my back porch. The sun was setting over Charleston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in my house, Brandon was probably planning his next move. Jennifer was probably convincing herself that controlling her mother was an act of love rather than theft. They thought I was the prey. An old woman, alone and vulnerable. Easy pickings for a patient predator. They had no idea the prey was watching back. On April 10th, I drove to downtown Charleston for a meeting that would change everything. The morning was warm, humidity already building even though it was barely 9. I parked my Lexus on King Street and walked 3 blocks to the office building at 156 King Street. Victoria Bennett's law practice occupied the entire 7th floor. I'd been here before, back when she was prosecuting cases and I was on the bench. We'd occasionally meet for lunch in the building's lobby restaurant. Now she specialized in estate law, trusts, and asset protection. Her timing and mine couldn't have been better. The receptionist showed me to a conference room where Victoria waited with another person I didn't recognize. Both stood as I entered. Gloria, good to see you. Victoria shook my hand firmly. This is Herbert Morgan. He's the notary I mentioned and one of the best estate planners in South Carolina. 25 years of experience. Herbert Morgan was older than Victoria, maybe 73, with steel gray hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His handshake was firm despite his age. Judge Harris, it's an honor. I followed several of your cases over the years. The Palmetto fraud case in 2008 was textbook legal reasoning. You're kind to remember, I said. Though I'm not a judge anymore. Just Gloria. Force of habit, Herbert smiled. Shall we get to business? We sat around the conference table. Victoria had coffee waiting. Black, the way I liked it. Always the details with her. I reviewed the investigator's report you sent, Victoria began, sliding a copy across the table. It's damning. Conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted manipulation of legal proceedings, solicitation of false testimony. If Brandon follows through with his plan, he's looking at potential criminal charges, not just civil liability. But we need to be proactive, Herbert added. Right now, if something happened to you, a stroke, an accident, anything that left you incapacitated, Jennifer would likely be appointed your guardian by default. She's your only child. Next of kin. No evidence of bad intent on her part, even though her husband is the one pulling the strings. Even then, the court looks at relationships, not motivations. And once she's appointed guardian, she has legal authority to make decisions about your assets, your care, your living situation. I sipped my coffee, feeling the weight of what we were discussing. So we need to make sure that can't happen. Exactly. Victoria pulled out a document. We create a living trust. You transfer all your assets into it. The house, your investments, your savings. Total value approximately $1,230,000. Correct. $890,000 for the house. $340,000 in retirement accounts and investments. Yes. The trust becomes the legal owner of these assets. You remain the trustee. You control everything. Make all decisions exactly as you do now. But if you become incapacitated, the trust documents specify who takes over as successor trustee. Not Jennifer, I said. Not Jennifer. We'll name me as successor trustee. I'll manage the assets according to your wishes, which we'll document very clearly. Herbert leaned forward. Here's the elegant part. We'll name the South Carolina Legal Aid Society as the primary beneficiary of the trust upon your death. I raised an eyebrow. Not Jennifer at all? Not initially. But, and this is key, we include a provision. Jennifer can become the beneficiary again if she demonstrates within 180 days that she's worthy of that trust. Documented acts of respect, responsibility, and genuine care for your well-being. A test, I said. An opportunity, Herbert corrected gently. We're not punishing Jennifer. We're protecting you and giving her a chance to prove she's not under her husband's control. Victoria pulled out another document. We'll also create a power of attorney for healthcare and finances, naming me as your attorney-in-fact. That means even if someone tries to have you declared incompetent, I'm the only one who can make decisions on your behalf. Not Jennifer, not Brandon, not a court-appointed guardian. The power of attorney supersedes all of that. Is this legal? It seems almost too convenient. Completely legal, Herbert assured me. South Carolina law is very protective of advanced directives. As long as you're mentally competent when you sign these documents, and we'll have medical evaluation to prove that, they're ironclad. Brandon can file all the petitions he wants. The court will see you've already made provisions, and they'll honor them. We spent the next 3 hours going through every detail. The trust language. The succession provisions. The specific criteria Jennifer would need to meet. Documented visits. Genuine conversation. Acts of care not motivated by financial gain. Herbert and Victoria had thought of everything. One more thing, I said as we were wrapping up. I don't want Brandon to know about this yet. If he finds out I've protected the assets, he might accelerate his plans or try something more desperate. Agreed, Victoria said. We'll file all the necessary documents, but keep them quiet. The trust doesn't become public record until you die. The power of attorney only activates if you're incapacitated. For now, from the outside, everything looks exactly the same. How long to finalize this? We can have everything drafted by tomorrow. Signed and notarized by April 15th. 5 days. We shook hands all around. As I left Victoria's office, I felt something I hadn't felt since the birthday party. Control. Not revenge. Not yet. But the solid foundation of a strategy. I drove home and parked in my usual spot. Through the living room window, I could see Brandon on his laptop, probably working on his real estate business. Or maybe drafting more evidence of my declining mental state. I walked inside carrying my briefcase. He looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "Hey, Gloria, where were you?" "Doctor's appointment." I lied smoothly. "Just a checkup." "Everything okay?" "Perfect health for a 68-year-old. I smiled at him. "Doctor says I've got another 20 years easy." His smile flickered for just a fraction of a second. There. That micro-expression of disappointment. He'd been hoping for bad news. Hoping for a diagnosis that would support his narrative. "That's wonderful," he said, recovering quickly. "Jennifer will be so relieved." "I'm sure she will." I went to my study and closed the door. From my desk drawer, I pulled out Sarah King's 47-page report and placed it next to the draft trust documents Victoria had given me. 2 pieces of a puzzle that would protect everything I'd built. Brandon thought he was playing chess. Moving pieces carefully. Planning several moves ahead. What he didn't realize was that I had already seen his entire strategy. And I was playing a different game entirely. In 5 days, on April 15th, I would sign documents that would make his 8 years of scheming worthless. My assets would be protected. My autonomy secured. Jennifer would have a chance to prove herself or lose everything. And the beautiful part? He wouldn't know until it was far too late. I opened my laptop and pulled up the security camera feeds. In the living room, Brandon was on his phone again. Probably calling Henry. Probably discussing their next move. Let them plan. Let them scheme. Every word they spoke was being recorded. Every lie they told was building my case. They were constructing the evidence of their own downfall, one conversation at a time. I poured myself a small bourbon. Just a finger. It was only noon, after all. And I allowed myself a smile. They wanted to hunt me like prey. They wanted to take what I'd spent a lifetime building. They wanted to rob me of my dignity, my home, my autonomy. What they didn't understand was this. I'd spent 30 years in the federal court system. I knew law, evidence, strategy. I knew how to build an airtight case. I knew patience. And I knew exactly how to give them enough rope to hang themselves. The game had changed. They just didn't know it yet. The weeks after signing the trust documents passed with excruciating slowness. I played my part perfectly. The slightly forgetful old woman, misplacing keys I knew exactly where I'd left them. Asking Jennifer to repeat things I'd heard clearly the first time. Every confused moment was calculated. Every hesitation was theater. Brandon watched me like a hawk studying a wounded rabbit. I could see the satisfaction in his eyes each time I pretended to forget something. He was documenting it all, I knew. Building his case. Counting down to July when he'd finally make his move. But I'd moved first. He just didn't know it yet. On May 12th, they came to my study. I was at my desk, sorting through old photographs. A genuinely enjoyable task that required no pretense. Jennifer knocked softly on the door frame. Brandon stood beside her, his hand on her arm in a gesture that looked supportive but was really controlling. I'd learned to read those subtle touches. "Mom, do you have a minute?" Jennifer's voice was strained. "We need to talk about something important." I set down the photograph I'd been holding. Jennifer at age 7, gap-toothed and holding a fishing rod, and gestured to the chairs across from my desk. "Of course. Come in." They sat. Brandon crossed his legs, smoothed his slacks, and arranged his face into an expression of warm concern. He'd practiced that look. 8 years of practice, probably. Gloria, we're worried about you, he began, his voice honey-sweet. You've seemed a bit scattered lately. Forgetting things. Getting confused about dates and appointments. Have I? I kept my voice mild, curious. You have, Mom. Jennifer wouldn't meet my eyes. She stared at her hands instead, fingers laced together so tightly her knuckles were white. Last week you couldn't remember where you'd parked at the grocery store. And you've asked me about the same property tax bill 3 times. I had parked in my usual spot, Bay 7. And I had asked about the tax bill once. But I let the lies sit between us, heavy and obvious. We think, Brandon continued, reaching into his messenger bag, it might be time to consider some help managing things. Just to take the pressure off you. Let you enjoy your retirement without worrying about bills and finances and all that stressful paperwork. He pulled out a folder, placed it on my desk with the careful reverence of someone presenting something precious. Inside were legal documents. Already prepared. Already notarized in places. Just waiting for signatures. I opened the folder. Read slowly, carefully. Financial power of attorney. Appointment of Jennifer as my legal guardian for financial matters. Authorization to access all bank accounts, investment portfolios, property deeds. Everything. They wanted everything. This is very thorough, I said finally. You've put a lot of thought into this. We have. Brandon leaned forward, his cologne, expensive, wafting across my desk. We love you, Gloria. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. I looked at Jennifer. Really looked at her. 42 years old. My daughter. The girl I'd taught to ride a bike, to throw a baseball, to stand up for what was right. When had she become this person who'd sit silently while her husband tried to rob her mother? Jennifer, I said quietly. Do you remember Victoria Forster? Her head snapped up. What? Victoria Forster. The fraud case from 2010. I sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison for running a real estate investment scam. I don't. Jennifer glanced at Brandon. What does that have to do with? She had a son. 22 years old at the time. He sat in the courtroom gallery and cried when I read the sentence. I felt sorry for him then. He was young. It wasn't his fault his mother was a criminal. The color was draining from Brandon's face. His perfectly composed expression cracking at the edges. Interesting thing about that son, I continued, my voice still calm, still conversational. His name was Brandon Foster. After his mother went to prison, he legally changed his surname to Lee, his father's name. And then, in 2017, he married a woman named Jennifer Harris. The silence in my study was absolute. I could hear the antique clock on my shelf ticking, each second falling like a hammer. Jennifer, I said, did you know your husband is Victoria Foster's son? That he married you under a false identity? That's ridiculous. Brandon's voice was too loud, too sharp. Gloria, this is exactly what we're worried about. These paranoid delusions. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out the folder I'd prepared, laid out the documents one by one on my desk, facing them like evidence in a trial. Birth certificate. Brandon Michael Foster, born June 15, 1993. Legal name change document. Brandon Michael Foster to Brandon Michael Lee. Filed March 2011. Court photograph. Victoria Foster at her sentencing. Her son in the gallery behind her, his face twisted with grief and rage. These aren't delusions, I said. These are facts. Jennifer picked up the birth certificate with shaking hands. Stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. Brandon, is this real? Your mother destroyed my family. Brandon was on his feet now. All pretense of concern evaporated. His face was flushed. His hands clenched into fists. She took my mother away for 12 years. 12 years. For what? For trying to provide for her family. For making a few mistakes in paperwork. For defrauding 14 families out of $3,700,000, I corrected. For fabricating property values and falsifying inspection reports. For stealing the retirement savings of people who trusted her. You had no right to judge her. No right to destroy our lives. I had every right. I was a federal judge. And she was guilty. I stood up slowly, placing my palms flat on my desk. What I didn't have, Brandon, was the knowledge that 15 years later, her son would marry my daughter under a false identity for the sole purpose of revenge. That's not. I didn't. But his denials were weak. The truth was written all over his face. Jennifer stood, the papers falling from her hands. You lied to me. About your name. About your family. About everything. Jennifer, please. Did you ever love me? Her voice broke. Or was I just a tool to get back at her? Brandon's mouth opened, closed. No answer came. You need to leave my study, I said quietly. Both of you. Jennifer, take some time to think. Really think about who you've been listening to. Jennifer walked out without another word. Brandon stayed for a moment longer, his eyes meeting mine with pure hatred. This isn't over, he whispered. Actually, I replied, I have a very good idea. I've been listening to your plans for weeks now. Every conversation with Henry. Every scheme to have me declared incompetent. Every dollar of your $89,000 in debt. I know everything, Brandon. The only question is, what are you going to do now that you know I know? He left without answering. But I didn't need an answer. I knew exactly what he'd do. He'd attack. Desperately. Recklessly. And I'd be ready. 2 weeks of silence. Jennifer moved into the guest bedroom. The house felt like a Cold War zone. Careful avoidance. Closed doors. I continued my routines. Morning coffee on the porch. Afternoon work in my clock workshop. Evening reading in my study. But the tension was suffocating. On May 27th, the counterattack came. A courier arrived at my door at 9:47 a.m. with legal documents. I signed for them, knowing exactly what they were before I opened the envelope. Court petition for incompetency evaluation. Filed by Brandon Lee. Co-signed by Jennifer Harris. I called Victoria immediately. He filed, I said. Expected. What's he claiming? I read through the petition. It was thorough. I had to give him that. 6 witness statements from his friends. Detailed accounts of my alleged mental decline. Forgotten conversations. Confusion about dates. Aggressive outbursts. Paranoid accusations. There were even video clips, apparently showing me disoriented in various locations. All fabricated or deliberately misinterpreted, of course. But on paper, it looked convincing. He's claiming I'm a danger to myself. That I've made baseless accusations against him. Threatened him. Showed signs of dementia and paranoia. And Jennifer signed it. I found her signature at the bottom, next to Brandon's. My daughter's handwriting. She did. She thinks she's protecting you, Victoria said. He's convinced her this is about your health, not her scheme. The hearing is June 24th. 3 weeks. Perfect. That gives us time to prepare. Victoria, are you ready for this? I thought about the 47-page report in my safe. The audio recordings of Brandon planning my downfall. The trust documents that had already moved my assets beyond his reach. The power of attorney that made Victoria, not Jennifer, my legal representative. I've been ready since April 15th, I said. Let's show them what real preparation looks like. The weeks crawled by. Brandon grew bolder, more confident. He must have thought the legal filing was his trump card. I'd catch him smiling sometimes. That small, secret smile of someone who thinks they've already won. I continued to act slightly confused, slightly uncertain. Let him think the stress was getting to me. Let him believe he'd broken me. On June 3rd, the court summons arrived officially. Competency hearing. June 24th, 10 a.m. Charleston County Court. Judge Margaret Cole presiding. Margaret Cole. I'd worked with her for 15 years before my retirement. Sharp mind. No tolerance for nonsense. If Brandon thought he'd get a sympathetic ear, he was in for a surprise. I spent the intervening weeks with Victoria preparing. We rehearsed questions and answers. Reviewed the evidence. Made sure every document was in order. Every recording properly labeled and time-stamped. This is going to destroy his case completely, Victoria said on June 20th, 4 days before the hearing. The question is whether you want to press criminal charges after. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Solicitation of false testimony. These are serious crimes. Let's see how the hearing goes first, I replied. I want justice, Victoria. Not just revenge. June 24th arrived cool and clear. I wore my best navy suit. The same one I'd worn to hundreds of court sessions when I was on the bench. Victoria picked me up at 8:30 a.m. Jennifer and Brandon were already at the courthouse when we arrived, sitting with their attorney, a young man in an ill-fitting suit who looked nervous. The courtroom was smaller than the ones I'd presided over, but the smell was the same. Old wood polish and tension. We took our seats. Judge Cole entered at precisely 10. All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Margaret Cole presiding. Margaret looked at me over her reading glasses. A brief flicker of recognition. Maybe sympathy. Then her face returned to judicial neutrality. Please be seated. Case number 2025, GC, 1847. Petition for competency evaluation of Gloria Harris. Counselors, your opening statements. Brandon's attorney stood, presented his case with nervous efficiency. The witness statements. The videos. The medical records from 15 years ago when I'd been treated for stress-related headaches. He made it sound damning. Made me sound like a confused old woman losing her grip on reality. Jennifer sat rigid next to Brandon, staring at her hands. Then it was Victoria's turn. She stood slowly, adjusted her blazer, and placed a leather folder on the table. Your Honor, before we proceed with any evaluation, I'd like to present evidence that this petition is not made in good faith, but is in fact part of a carefully orchestrated fraud. Brandon's face went still. His attorney looked confused. Objection, Your Honor, he said weakly. That's a serious accusation. I have documentation, Victoria continued. Audio recordings of the petitioner, Mr. Brandon Lee, discussing his plan to have Ms. Harris declared incompetent, gain control of her assets, and sell her property. These recordings are dated March 22nd, more than 2 months before this petition was filed. The courtroom went silent. I watched Brandon's face transform. The confident smile melted. His skin went from flush to pale in seconds, the color of old parchment. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Opened again. No sound came out. It was beautiful. Victoria played the first recording. Brandon's voice, crystal clear. Just hold on until July. Once Jennifer has power of attorney, we sell this place. Split the proceeds. His attorney's face matched his now. Pale. Shocked. Completely blindsided. The second recording. I'll pay them $500 each for statements. Jennifer's head came up. She stared at Brandon with an expression I'd never seen before. Betrayal. Horror. Disbelief. All mixed together. Your Honor, Victoria said. We also have financial records showing Mr. Lee and his business partner have debts totaling $89,000, with monthly payments of $4,200 that they cannot afford. His motivation is entirely financial, not concern for Ms. Harris's welfare. Judge Cole studied the documents. Her expression darkened. "Mr. Lee," she said, "did you solicit false testimony from witnesses?" Brandon's hands were shaking, actually trembling. He gripped the table edge to steady them. Your Honor, those recordings they're taken out of context. Did you or did you not offer to pay individuals for witness statements?" Silence. Then, barely audible, "Yes." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "This petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm imposing a fine of $12,000 for abuse of court process and filing under false pretenses. Mr. Lee, you're fortunate I'm not referring this for criminal prosecution. We're done here." Brandon collapsed back into his chair. The color had completely drained from his face. His lips were trembling. He looked like someone who just watched their entire world explode. Jennifer stood abruptly and walked out of the courtroom without looking at either of us. I allowed myself a small smile as we left. Justice, it turned out, looked a lot like watching a liar face the consequences of his lies. The days after the court ruling were quiet. Too quiet. Jennifer stayed with a friend named Rachel from her office. Brandon remained in the house, moving through the rooms like a ghost. We didn't speak. He stayed in the master bedroom. I remained in my study and workshop. But I knew the real pressure hadn't started yet. The court fine of $12,000 was just the beginning. His financial situation was precarious, and I intended to push it over the edge. On July 2nd, I had lunch with an old colleague, Richard Morrison, who owned commercial real estate throughout Charleston. We met at the Harbor Room, the same place Victoria and I had first strategized back in March. "Gloria, good to see you." Richard shook my hand warmly. "I heard about your court case. That was some remarkable detective work." "Thank you. Actually, that's related to why I wanted to meet. You own the building at 342 Meeting Street, correct? The one with the real estate offices." "I do. Why?" "One of your tenants, Coastal Properties, owned by Brandon Lee and Henry Wilson. They're behind on rent, aren't they?" Richard's expression soured. 3 months. 8,100 total. I've been patient, but my patience has limits. What if I bought that debt from you? Face value. 8,100. You get paid immediately. I assume the collection responsibility. He studied me over his coffee cup. "This is personal, isn't it?" "Very. Consider it done. I'll have my attorney draw up the papers this afternoon." By July 5th, the debt was legally mine. Brandon owed me 8,100, and he had no idea. I waited. Let the deadline pressure build. Let him scramble for solutions that didn't exist. Her real estate business was barely surviving. They'd only closed 2 properties all year. His annual income was roughly $54,000. But the business loan payment of $4,200 per month ate up $50,400 annually. He was living on $3,600 per year after business expenses. Add the $12,000 court fine, and he was drowning. On July 15th, Victoria sent the formal demand letter. Payment of $8,100 within 14 days, or we'd file suit and seek attachment of business assets. I imagined Brandon opening that letter. The shock of realizing his landlord's debt had somehow transferred to me. The cold calculation of his impossible math. 12,000 fine plus 8,100 debt plus monthly loan payments he couldn't afford. No way out. 10 days passed. No payment. No contact. Then on July 25th, at 6:47 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brandon on my doorstep. He'd aged years in the month since the court case. Dark circles under his eyes. Hair uncombed. The expensive clothes replaced with jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt. He looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Gloria," his voice cracked. "Please. Can we talk?" I stepped aside. led him into my study, didn't offer him a seat. Let him stand there, diminished and desperate, in the room where he tried to trick me into signing away my autonomy just 2 months ago. I can't pay the rent debt, he said. The court fine wiped out what little savings I had. The business is failing. If you sue, we'll have to close. I'll lose everything. Yes, I said simply. You will. Please. Tears started running down his face. Real ones this time. Not the calculated manipulation from before. I know what I did was wrong. I was angry about my mother. I wanted to hurt you. But I'm begging you. Please don't destroy my life. I walked to my desk, pulled out a folder, handed it to him. Inside was the demand letter, the court judgment for the fine, and a calculation of his business debt payments for the next 5 years. Let me make sure I understand, I said, my voice cold and precise. You're asking me, the woman you publicly humiliated at her 68th birthday party, the woman you called a fool, the woman you tried to have declared incompetent, the woman you planned to rob of her home and her dignity, to show you mercy? Yes. Where was your mercy when you married my daughter under false pretenses? Where was your honor when you spent 8 years lying to my face? Where was your conscience when you paid people to give false testimony about me? He had no answer. Just stood there crying, mascara-free tears running down his cheeks. You chose revenge over integrity, I continued. You chose deception over honesty. You followed your mother's path. She stole money. You tried to steal autonomy. The difference is, I'm not a victim like the families your mother defrauded. I fought back. I pointed to the documents in his hand. You have 14 days to pay. If you don't, I file suit. The court will order payment or force you to close your business. Either way, you lose. There has to be something. Some way. There isn't. You made your choices. Now live with the consequences. He left my study with slumped shoulders and no hope in his eyes. I watched him go, feeling neither triumph nor pity. Just the cold satisfaction of justice being served. The next 8 days were silent. No payment arrived. No desperate phone calls. Nothing. On August 5th, Victoria filed the lawsuit. The court process moved quickly. Brandon didn't contest it. On August 15th, the judge ordered payment of $8,100 plus $3,400 in court costs and attorney's fees. Total, $11,500. 30 days to pay or face asset seizure and forced bankruptcy. That same day, Henry Wilson called Brandon. I didn't hear the conversation, but I saw the aftermath. Henry was dissolving their partnership. He'd found another real estate agent to team up with. Someone whose business wasn't imploding. He blamed Brandon for everything. The court case. The debt. The failure. On August 20th, Coastal Properties closed its doors permanently. Brandon's income dropped to zero. He was now entirely dependent on Jennifer's $67,000 annual salary as a paralegal. But Jennifer hadn't spoken to him since the court case. She was living with her friend Rachel, paying rent there, sending minimal support money home. The walls were closing in. My plan was working perfectly. But the satisfaction I felt wasn't about his suffering. It was about accountability. He tried to take everything from me. Now he was facing the consequences of that choice. Justice, I'd learned over 30 years on the bench, wasn't always pretty. But it was necessary. And I wasn't done yet. September 15th arrived with the weight of inevitability. Jennifer filed for divorce that morning. I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was the relief I felt. Not satisfaction at Brandon's downfall, though there was some of that, but genuine relief that my daughter was finally free. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. South Carolina law, combined with the prenuptial agreement I had insisted on back in 2017, made it straightforward. That prenup had seemed paranoid at the time. Victoria had suggested it, citing the fact that Brandon and Jennifer hadn't known each other long. Just a precaution, she'd said. Protects both families. Now it protected Jennifer from losing everything. On September 28th, the final judgment came through. Brandon received his personal belongings and half of their shared marital debt. $22,250. No claim to my house. No claim to Jennifer's future earnings. No alimony, given the short marriage duration and his documented fraud. I watched him pack on October 3rd. He moved like a ghost through the rooms, boxing up clothes and pictures. His face had aged a decade in 6 months. Lines around his eyes. Grey starting in his dark hair. The confident posture replaced with defeated slouching. When he carried the last box to his car, he paused at my study door. I was at my desk, reviewing the trust documents Victoria and I would finalize the next day. I hope you're happy, he said quietly. I looked up at him. This man who'd spent 8 years plotting my downfall. Who'd married my daughter for revenge. Who'd tried to steal my home and my dignity. I'm not happy, Brandon. But I am satisfied. There's a difference. I set down my pen. You had a choice 15 years ago. Your mother went to prison because she stole from innocent people. You could have learned from her mistakes. Instead, you followed the same path. Lying. Manipulating. Trying to steal. The only difference is you tried to steal autonomy instead of money. In some ways, that's worse. His face crumpled. I loved my mother. I understand that. But love doesn't justify destroying other people's lives. Your mother made her choices. I gave her a fair trial and a just sentence. You made your own choices. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices, just like she did. He left without another word. I watched his car disappear down Battery Street, carrying him back to whatever life awaited him. I felt no triumph in that moment. Just the quiet certainty that justice had been served. The next day, October 5th, I met Victoria Bennett and Herbert Morgan at the notary's office. We updated the living trust documents. Jennifer was once again the primary beneficiary, but with conditions. She couldn't sell the house for 10 years after my death. And she had to provide 20 hours of free legal consultation annually to low-income families. These conditions, I told Victoria, aren't punishment. They're education. I want Jennifer to understand that wealth comes with responsibility. That our family values aren't just words. They're actions. She'll understand, Victoria assured me. She's already enrolled in night classes. Wants to finish her law degree. Says she wants to honor what you built. That evening, Jennifer came over for dinner. She brought takeout from the harbor room. Blackened grouper. My favorite. We ate on the back porch, watching the sunset paint Charleston Harbor in shades of orange and gold. I've been thinking about what you said, Jennifer began, setting down her fork. About earning back trust. About showing through actions, not words. And I'm starting volunteer work at the Legal Aid Society. Filing paperwork. Helping with intake interviews. It's not much, but it's a start. I nodded. It's a good start. We talked for hours that night. Really talked. The way we hadn't in years. She told me about the red flags she'd ignored. Brandon's evasiveness about his family. His obsession with the house's value. The way he'd slowly isolated her from me. She apologized again. I told her that actions would speak louder than apologies. October 28th was Jennifer's 43rd birthday. She came over early. Brought coffee and breakfast pastries. We sat on the terrace, the morning sun warm on our faces. I presented her with a gift. The 1935 Hamilton pocket watch I'd been restoring since August. It gleamed in the sunlight. The mechanism I'd painstakingly rebuilt now keeping perfect time. This watch was broken, I said, handing it to her. Every gear stripped. Every spring damaged. It would have been easier to throw it away and buy a new one. But I didn't. I took it apart. Understood what was broken. and fixed it piece by piece. It took patience. It took the right tools. But now it works perfectly. Jennifer turned the watch over in her hands, understanding the metaphor. Relationships are like that, I continued. When they break, you have two choices. Give up, or do the hard work to fix them. We're doing the hard work. Thank you, Mom. Her voice was thick with emotion. For not giving up on me. You're my daughter. I'll never give up on you. But I also won't tolerate betrayal or dishonesty. We move forward on a foundation of truth, or we don't move forward at all. We sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, watching boats move across the harbor. Mother and daughter. Not perfect, but honest. Not without scars, but healing. You know what's funny? I said after a while. Brandon thought revenge was about destroying me. Taking my house. My dignity. My autonomy. But revenge, real justice, isn't about destruction. It's about accountability. He made choices. I held him accountable. That's all. He chose his pain over everyone else's well-being, Jennifer said quietly. Exactly. 15 years ago, he decided his suffering justified hurting others. I simply showed him the consequences of that choice. I didn't destroy his life. He did that himself when he built it on lies. The October sun climbed higher, warming the day. Somewhere in South Carolina, Brandon was rebuilding his life from scratch. Somewhere in Charleston, Henry Wilson was running his real estate business without the partner who dragged him into fraud. And here on Battery Street, in the house I'd lived in for 45 years, my daughter and I were rebuilding something more important than revenge. We were rebuilding trust. And this time, it was built on truth. Justice, I'd learned over 68 years and 3 decades on the bench, wasn't always swift. But when it finally arrived, it was worth the wait.